If you're thinking of buying a Morgan for restoration, you've got to know what to look for. We took Colin Musgrove's advice on where the trouble spots can be found.
Well, this car is a typical case in point. This is a 1978 4.4 and it's only done 27,000 miles from new, and outwardly it looks quite reasonable. But if you start looking around the car itself, and particularly the problem areas are going to be along the wing beading, where you can see the bubbling of the wing. It isn't just the paint coming off, it is in fact, there, you can see the whole wing has gone completely through. That means a complete new wing, totally a replacement job. And the unfortunate thing is that once that occurs, you can be almost absolutely 100% certain that the woodwork underneath there is as bad as the metalwork on the outside. Right, while we're on bodywork, we'll just lift up the bonnet and have a look at the actual internal part of the bodywork, and mention in passing that the bonnet should be well looked at, because that is a particularly expensive and more difficult item to replace should it require it. Looking at the hinges underneath here, but this seems to be okay in this one. Now, one of the killers in restoring Morgans is the condition of the bulkhead and its associated metalwork. Now, you can see here we have a so-called heater platform. That's already got completely soaking wet and is utterly rotten. That needs replacing, and replacing with some better material than that one. The heater itself is quite rotten. The bulkhead flake off, and you can see no problem at all. Rusty metal underneath, rusty screws, and rusty associated metalwork as well. Now, replacing a bulkhead is quite expensive, but in fact you can get away with it by cutting off the rusty areas below the line of the wing, which you can see here, welding in a new piece, and you can do quite a nice invisible repair on that. So often it looks worse than it is. You can bodge a hole straight through the wing there, and in similar other places, also underneath the lights, it's starting to crack as well, and also down here. So it requires new wing on that side. Also the cowl, you can see the same sort of cracking effect appearing around the cowl. The problem is that the rust is emanating from inside the car and coming out. That the cowl probably can well be repaired. It's not a difficult job to do that. So we can probably say that the cowl is okay. Right, now here's a typical example of a steel wing on a Morgan. The wings are not actually made by the Morgan factory, they're made by a specialist firm in Manchester, but they are made in 3 pieces. And you can see here the weld line, which is always the start of the problem on a steel wing. The slag isn't removed properly, a very large quantity of filler is put into the wing by the Morgan factory when they paint it, and you can see the usual problem. It's actually cracking and rusting down the weld line, and also adjacent to the wired edge is completely gone right the way through. So that wing is 100% scrap. This is the driver's door, which almost invariably is worse than the passenger's door, but in fact this woodwork doesn't look too bad, and you can tell by the trim of the car that it has been obviously well looked after. But it's in some cases it's a fight against time with an early Morgan. So it's 2 front wings it requires, probably the quarter panels, but these quarter panels may well be savable. The rear wings are looking pretty reasonable at this stage. Of course, you never do know until you take the car completely to pieces, and this is something which we make clear once you actually expose the inner horrors. It can be a lot worse than it originally appears. Back panel looks pretty reasonable. But the saving grace, I think, on this car, which may well not be on the car that you or anybody else is looking at, is the fact that the woodwork does appear to be okay. And the only way to check the woodwork is to actually push a screwdriver into the wood. Now, of course, one should always do this when one's buying a new Morgan, but it's very difficult to do that with a nice new motor car inside somebody's front drive or on a garage forecourt. But really, it's most imperative that you do check very, very carefully the state of the woodwork, because the woodwork is the most difficult part of the car to replace. So this car is going to be dismantled. It's going to have its front and rear wings taken off, rear panel taken off, quarter panels, door skins taken off. Check very carefully the bonnet, then the whole paint will be removed entirely. See what we've got underneath that. So as an absolute bare minimum, I think we're going to find 2 new front wings, a cowl, perhaps some woodwork, and a bare metal repaint with the car in pieces, then reassembled correctly, and then it should last a lot longer than 10 years next time.